So today's session, there's going to be, again, lots of ideas and tips to take away. So do make sure that you have your notebook ready to take some notes and be prepared to have some incredible light bulb moments. We know as coaches that it's not just about curiosity, but it's also about self-awareness. So you're going to get lots of that today with today's guest. I feel privileged that I've crossed paths with this amazing woman on a number of occasions, both through my work at the Coaching Academy, but also through some work that I did with a colleague of mine in my network, the amazing Dr. Audrey Tang, who hosts not just a podcast, but she's now got her own TV show, but prior to that, had an amazing radio show as well. And Ronnie has been a guest on that on a couple of times, which is fantastic too. So let me put you out of your misery saying, who is today's guest? Today's guest is, wait for it, a multi-award-winning trauma recovery coach and a clinical hypnotherapist. She is one of the world's leading experts in the field of narcissistic abuse recovery. She flies all over the world. And it's so wonderful that we've been able to grab some time. I know she's been over in California recently, but maybe we'll dive into that a little bit more in our interview as well. But Ronia is also part of our Protégé Coach alumni at the Coaching Academy and was the winner of the International Coach of the Year award back in 2019. She was also the UK's first narcissistic recovery coach back in 2017. So there's going to be lots of wonderful things that she's going to bring to today's conversation today. And I really want to make sure we maximize our time with her because there is just so much that I want to chat to her about today. So let's dive in and say, welcome, Ronnie. Lovely to see you again.
Thanks so much for having me again.
It's my pleasure, my pleasure. Now, you do fly all over the world. Tell me, where are you listening in from or talking to us today from, I should say?
Right now I'm in Lisbon, in Portugal. And I just came back from 5 weeks in the US where I was on speaking tour, and I'm going back out to the US in 4 weeks' time.
Wow.
And yeah.
So is Lisbon pleasure or business?
Pleasure is where I'm currently based. And yeah, well, basically popping in and out of.
Well, it's nice to have a permanent base. Actually, I spy a little sort of photograph behind you. I think that was when you got your award with us at the Coaching Academy back in 2019, wasn't it?
It was actually. It was, yeah, that was my first award I won. So I had no clue about red carpet and stuff. I actually, I channeled a friend of mine who was born in Hollywood. So, you know, she's the red carpet pro because I really didn't know. I was so awkward and I was like, oh, what would Josie do? And then that photo came out. So I think I channeled her pretty well.
You look incredible, as you always do, my lovely friend. You really do. Oh, that's amazing. Listen, let's dive in a little bit. And before you share with us what you have been sort of doing in the sort of the lead up maybe to sort of joining us today on Coaching Conversations, could you sort of maybe just sort of share with us, because I often say on Coaching Conversations, it's our stories that I think that really sort of speak volumes to who we are today. How did you start your journey to sort of become this multi-award-winning coach? It's always so wonderful to see and watch your impressive success, Ronnie. But, you know, let's rewind a little bit and maybe if you don't mind, just share a little bit about your journey to become a coach.
Yeah, well, I never planned on being a coach. Actually, it just kind of happened. And you know how the universe sometimes, you know, just leads you down a certain path. And it was back in 2016 when I came back from LA. I had been living in LA for 4 years, and I experienced narcissistic abuse while I was in LA. And it literally, it cost me pretty much everything, my job and my house and my health, myself. It almost cost me my life. And as a result, I basically had to drop everything that I had built for myself in America. And then I came back because my mental health wasn't very good and I was really struggling. I was a chartered accountant at the time. So I did have a very successful career in finance, but I basically had to put the puzzle pieces together and even understanding of what had even happened to me. And back then it wasn't like now. You couldn't go on Google and find narcissistic abuse. It just didn't really exist the same way it does now. And there was this one particular afternoon, I was sitting on my couch feeling rather sorry for myself. And I wasn't working at the time either because I just couldn't really. And there was this ad on Facebook popping up for the 2-day coaching academy event. And I was just scrolling down and it was like, oh, learn life coaching and Chelsea Harbor Hotel. And I was like, oh, Chelsea Harbor Hotel, that sounds really fancy. I bet they have AC because it was so hot that summer. And so I went to the event, and on the first day I was like, oh wow, this is interesting, because even the most basic coaching tools already had such a profound impact on me, because what it did was it shifted my focus away from what had happened and away from my abuser and actually onto myself. And everybody, most people that I hear in the coaching conversations obviously know how powerful coaching can be. And then the second day I was like, okay, so I can add that to what I'm already doing. I was working with dysfunctional finance teams at the time, and maybe eventually I might transition out. Third day I signed up, I applied for the coaching academy, I had my interview, and 10 days later I actually registered my first company. So that weekend was a complete game changer. And from that point forward, I didn't actually look back. Like the change of mindset was just so incredible that from that point forward, it really just was forward. And because I obviously was very passionate about, well, what had happened to me, and nobody listened, nobody understood. I was called old names under the sun, and I'm like, no, hold on a second. There is actually something really substantial here. It's really important. We need to start talking about it. And I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And of course, I did other trainings as well in the meantime, because through the coaching, I then found NLP. Through NLP, I found hypnosis. So it was kind of like the snowball that happened. And the coaching academy was actually the first organization that acknowledged me for my work, even at a time when narcissistic abuse didn't actually mean anything. So yeah, that was kind of the kickstart. And since then I've just been, knocking on doors and had a lot of doors slammed in my face, but luckily I have no problem with rejection. So I just keep knocking. And by now, I mean, it's been 7 years. It's just, it's turned now, because all of a sudden narcissistic abuse has become this major thing. It means something. It gets acknowledged more. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done, but a lot has changed since. And at this point, I'm at a point where people now come to me, where it flipped around, where people invite me to give talks, to give trainings. Next year, for example, I'm going to Pakistan because I was invited to give training in Pakistan, because obviously there's a lot of trauma happening in Pakistan. So yeah, it's been an absolute whirlwind journey. It has, but it's so me, which makes it so exciting. And yeah, I just keep going and see where it will take me next.
And the word sort of inspirational gets thrown around a lot, but I really am inspired by how you've been able to sort of really turn around the ability for people to be able now to recognize and talk about this subject.
Mhm.
And that's really important to me, because you're right. It's so easy when we've had doors slammed in our faces for various reasons for us to sort of think, oh, okay, well, you know, maybe this just isn't something that the world is ready to hear. But the inspiring thing for me on that is, you know, no matter how hard that door was slammed in your face, you just kept going, which is incredible. Tell us a little bit more, Ronnie, about the work that you've been doing. You know, I think it was about 2-3 years ago you were last on Coaching Conversation. I think it was 2 years ago. You were doing a lot of work then, but, you know, sort of even more incredible stuff. You know, I'm constantly following you on your social media, and, you know, I do get to see what you're up to, and our paths have crossed on various radio shows since. But share with us, if you don't mind, some of the areas you mentioned, Pakistan, but, you know, some of the other areas that and the maybe the conferences and the training that you've been able to sort of offer to raise awareness of this important topic.
Yeah, so I still do one-on-one work, but not as much as the last time we talked. The last time we talked, that was my main business. It's what I was doing all the time. And it's also what I needed to do to be able to do what I do now, right? Because everybody who's starting out right now, if you're shying away from actually putting it into action, that's where your confidence will come from. And that's how you actually become the expert in whatever it is that you are doing. So back then, I was very much focused on perfecting my approach, which obviously is always a life approach. Things always change. We always learn more. But now I still have a few one-on-one clients, but not that much. It's really about, you know, staying in the practice and not get lazy with the coaching and everything. But what I do now more so is training people, because narcissistic abuse has become this big thing. However, there is still no help available. And what's really important is actually that we offer help and support in the right way, because we have this topic blown up on social media, but actually most of the content out there is incredibly harmful, because it's written by people that haven't done the healing work. It's written by people that are not familiar with the power of language. It's written by people in a victim mindset. It comes from the wrong energy. So very often it actually causes more harm than good. And that's why it's so important that we do talk about it, but we talk about it in the right way. And the way I'm doing, I'm not the biggest fan of social media. I should be doing more, but clearly it works somehow. But the way that I'm getting that conversation out there and really have conversations both with professionals as much as survivors is I do a lot of public speaking now. And if you had told me 10 years ago that I would feel at home on a stage in front of 1,000 people, I would have not believed it, because I had to do quite a bit of NLP work on that to be able to do that. But now I absolutely love it, because just the things that happen in the room, you know, the light bulbs that go on, the transformation that we can achieve to facilitate, even just by standing up there for an hour and talking about things in the right way. And we have hypnosis, we have coaching, we have the language. So obviously we are all trained in this, which means we can bring across information in a very different way, in a very more powerful way than, you know, just superficial content that's being put out there. And what I basically now do is I work with the survivors, yes, but I also, even more so at this stage, work with the professionals, so coaches, therapists, medical professionals, charities, police, lawyers, because the awareness is still lacking. And it's also so important to raise that awareness so we can actually provide help. And yeah, so that's basically what I've been pretty much been busy with for the last 2 years. So last year I did, I think, 88,000 kilometers. And this year, I think it was more, actually. I'm not done yet. I'm still on tour until the end of November. But yeah. And I've written a book in the meantime as well.
Oh, just a little throwaway. I don't write a book.
Yeah. It was a spurt of inspiration. It actually didn't even take that long. I was like, oh, my brain fog just completely left my body. What do I do with all this clarity? So I wrote a book. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I don't know where you get your energy from, but it is contagious. And I love that what you said about the fact that now you're working with professionals, because if our our therapists or lawyers and the medical profession and police are going to be there to give the right support, they need to be able to understand, sort of thoroughly what this is all about. So I thought that might be a good place perhaps for us to move into now, because you mentioned social media, and we see that word out there a lot, narcissistic. So maybe we could start with a real zoomed out approach and just start with, because words and language you've already mentioned, really important. Let's start with that word narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean? And what would you say to people who say, oh, it's just an overused buzzword?
Well, the fact is, it is an overused buzzword. That's true, because nowadays everybody who ever hurt someone's feelings is called a narcissist, or somebody doesn't agree with us, all of a sudden they're gaslighting and things like that. So trauma, gaslighting, narcissistic abuse, things like that are very much overused, which is the truth. But that's why we need to talk about it in the right way to bring it back into the right context, because not everybody that hurts our feelings is actually abusive. And just because a relationship breaks up, that doesn't mean someone was abused. So, for example, when I onboard clients, there's a very diligent application process, which actually helps me identify whether somebody only had a bad breakup and the breakup hurt, or whether they've actually experienced abuse. So when we talk about narcissistic abuse, real narcissistic abuse, it basically means abuse perpetrated by somebody who exhibits narcissistic tendencies. Now, narcissism is on a spectrum, and some people have certain narcissistic behaviors. It may even be out of, their own self-protection. But the scale goes all the way up, sociopath, psychopath. Every psychopath is a narcissist, but not every narcissist is a psychopath. So just throwing that word around really doesn't help, because the impact that narcissistic abuse has is incredibly detrimental to the survivor's mental health, physical health, quality of life, because what it causes is actual complex post-traumatic stress. So that abuse changes the landscape of the brain. So it's not just somebody who was just a bit of a whatever, fill in the blank. There's so much more to it. It's also very calculated and very tactical. And that's why, as I said, it's important we talk about it in the right way.
What's sort of the most misunderstood element of narcissism, would you say?
I think the most misunderstood part is that people think when they hear the word narcissist, it's just somebody who's really full of themselves and, likes to look at themselves in the mirror and those kind of things. So like the very typical, overt, classic narcissist. Now, if narcissism was only that, no harm actually would be done, right? So if I'm full of myself and I'm in love with my own reflection, I'm not hurting anybody else. But of course, narcissistic abuse goes so much further than that. And most of the narcissists that we experience are nothing like that. They are not out there and in love with themselves. They're the exact opposite. There are a lot of different forms of narcissism, actually. And once you become aware of that, those classic narcissists, they seem like amateurs because they're just so obvious. You go like, yeah, no, thanks. I'm walking away. Whereas the covert narcissist, where it's like really under the surface, you can't actually tell in the beginning at all. And they're the exact opposite. They are vulnerable. They are struggling with their mental health. They have their insecurities. They might be really communal. They do a lot of good things, which, you know, obviously you wouldn't first think of when you think about a narcissist, because they're all about themselves. Now the latest development over the last few years is the spiritual narcissist. They appear very self-aware, very much into their own self-development, into their own healing work. But again, with everything that narcissists do, it's all an illusion. So I think the biggest misconception is that a narcissist is just somebody who's so full of themselves and in love with themselves, because most of the time it's not who we are dealing with. And actually, just quickly, another misconception is when you look into the data, 2% of the general population apparently are narcissistic, which is ridiculous, because if you think about a narcissist, they would never go away to a therapist and go like, or a psychiatrist and go like, I think there's something wrong with me. Can we do a personality evaluation? Because it wouldn't even occur to them, because narcissists have a lack of self-awareness. So those 2% that actually get diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, they're really high up on the spectrum there, right? They got caught doing something criminal, and then they had a psych eval ordered, and that's how they got their diagnosis. The narcissists that we deal with in our day-to-day life, they won't have a diagnosis, but it doesn't mean that they don't have a narcissistic tendency, narcissistic behaviors.
Mm. I mean, it's a huge topic, isn't it? And perhaps we'll sort of talk about sort of red flags and things like that, sort of as we dive in. Now, I know you've incorporated your therapeutic training. You have a strong background in therapy and therapeutic approach. You've already mentioned about hypnotherapy and your NLP training as well. As this sort of area becomes more, and maybe there's more awareness around it, why do you think it's really important to have a background in therapy and other sort of approaches if somebody is thinking of a sort of coaching in this area?
Yeah, so trauma is incredibly complex. Trauma sits very deep, and also working with traumatized people is very different to working with non-traumatized people, because they are very unpredictable. They are struggling with their mental health. So it's very important to have the sufficient training, which will allow you to, identify what you're dealing with to start with. And then also that gives you the confidence and the safety to deal with people like that. Because the last thing you want is somebody leaves your session and then you go into an anxiety panic attack because you don't know if they walk out and do something stupid. And that's why it's really, really important. Coaching is an incredible tool. It's what started my journey as well. Back then, there wasn't like this complementary approach as it is now. Like coaching was seen very, very separate. You wouldn't mix the different modalities in a way we do now. Luckily, we do now. But the thing with trauma is it sits so deep, which means you also need the tools to access the damage on the same level that it was caused. And coaching in itself won't be sufficient. Also, trauma never resolves in the cognitive function. So that's why we need things like hypnosis to come out of the cognitive function and dive deeper. And narcissistic abuse survivors are actually the perfect example that trauma recovery doesn't have in the cognitive function, because I haven't met anyone who couldn't write a PhD on this topic. If it has happened to you, you learn everything about it. You are obsessed with it. And now they have all this incredible in-depth theoretical knowledge, and then they go out and the same things happen over and over and over again because nothing has actually changed. And that's why it's important that we build our own toolbox, right? With coaching being the foundation. But then there are so many different complementary modalities that are available now. NLP, absolutely incredible. Without NLP, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Like NLP literally saved my life. Hypnosis, I do havening techniques as well. There's EMDR, there's breath work, there's so many different things. And at the end of the day, it's about building our toolbox that we can share with our clients. And because that's what the intention has to be, right? Not keeping somebody as long as possible, but get them up and running as soon as possible with practical tools.
Fantastic. So important, Ronnie. What is it about this sort of area in particular that makes it so dangerous? And also, why do you think that so many of us miss the signs, if you like?
Well, narcissistic abuse is so subtle. It can be quick, but it's still subtle. And unless it has happened to us, we don't even know that something like that exists. And what it does is it really plays into our deepest fears, our deepest insecurities, because what does a narcissist do? They love bomb us, right? They make us feel so special and seen and heard and, like loved, really. I mean, all we want, any human being, is to be loved and to belong. And by the way, it's not exclusive to romantic relationships, right? It can happen in the workplace, it can happen in families. It's exactly the same thing, friendships. But the process, how it happens, is the same. And I hold whole lectures on the topic of trauma bonding, because a lot of people, they know, we all know somebody who's in a relationship they shouldn't be in, but they keep going back. And I hold whole lectures on that topic, trauma bonding, why they actually cannot just walk away, what neurologically happens in the brain that actually keeps them hooked. And again, it's really not happening in the cognitive function. Narcissistic abuse is like an all sensory kind of experience. And it affects us on every single level of our being. It affects us mentally, emotionally, affects us physically, spiritually. And that's why, again, it's so important to have the right tools to address every single aspect of it. And then, of course, it's invisible. So what happens a lot is people realize eventually what is going on, then they go and ask for help, and there is just no help available, because first of all, the knowledge isn't there, the awareness isn't there, and secondly, people just don't understand. So they will then give you like some really well-meaning advice, and maybe they even try to help, but because there's such a disconnect with the horrors that a narcissistic abuse survivor has experienced and the general understanding or lack of understanding, it's incredibly isolating, and it's a really, really tough journey to be on. Even though when you have the right tools to get out the other side, it will be the most rewarding thing that has ever happened. Which sounds very cliche, but it's actually true.
Well, that's lovely, because it's always good to know, that even in our darkest places, there is some hope, and that chink of light is so important to know. The thing that is just sort of popping into my head is one of the things I'd like to explore with you, if I may, Ronnie, is because one of the things you mentioned is not just in romantic relationships. And prior to me working at the Coaching Academy, I had a large contract with the local authority. And I used to do a lot of group parenting work. And I ran emotional well-being programs. And I remember meeting this young mum who had left a relationship. And we were talking after one of the sessions. And we were quite a long way into the program. It was an 11-week program. And she said one of the hardest things for her was to, when she decided to leave her abuser, that a lot of her friends and her family would say things like, but he's so charming, or you go on lovely holidays and the children are at a beautiful private school. Why would you leave that? And it wasn't until probably I met you that I came across this concept of flying monkeys, which I think is just, it's a really interesting sort of concept. Would you mind just sort of explaining that and what a flying monkey is and why it can be so dangerous?
Yeah, so flying monkeys are basically the enablers that a narcissist surrounds themselves with. And either it can be people that are basically caught up in their net as well. You know, they're basically next in line once they discard their current partner. Or it can also be people that make certain behaviors, unacceptable behaviors, acceptable. Like, for example, when I was living in Hollywood, I mean, it was very rock and roll, but my abuser would surround himself with other guys that actually had the same behaviors, you know, like drugging people and like all in the name of rock and roll. And when they surround themselves with people that do the same things, all of a sudden the behaviors become acceptable. So flying monkeys can be both. It can be people that they intentionally surround themselves with to seem more acceptable in their behaviors. It can also be people that basically do that dirty work for them. So they do a lot of triangulation, right, where they play people against each other, which is very calculated. And I'm not even sure, like the ones that you mentioned now, I probably wouldn't even classify them as flying monkeys because they don't really serve a purpose for the abuser other than basically discrediting the experience of the survivor. Because I mean, that's what every narcissist does. They create an illusion. So what's outside is very different than what's on the inside. So that's when then the victim decides to speak up and tries to get out. What happens is that no one believes them. So it's very calculated that way. But they are probably not the people that I would classify as flying monkeys. I would consider flying monkeys people that are much more tactical, involved in taking the victim down.
Okay, thank you. I think that's really important to really identify that. Let's take it back a little bit then, because some of the things that are sort of the questions that I've been asked is, so how do we even spot the signs? What is it that we look for? What are those, what I would call red flags that we go, oh, okay, so I need to be aware here?
Yeah, so there are tons of red flags with narcissists. Like they make you feel worse just for them to make them feel better, for example, things like that. They really don't have any empathy or self-awareness. They don't really care about how you feel, all those kind of things. And the problem with that is you can go on Google and you can get like this whole list of the red flags. I actually don't even like talking about it because it doesn't matter how well we know the red flags, we ignore them anyway for the sake of love, right? And every narcissistic abuse survivor has been in a situation where they clock the red flag, but then, you know, it's very easy to find excuses for other people's behaviors. You know, maybe they had a bad day at work and they are stressed, and that's why they are treating you the way they do. So what I actually prefer to talk about, and in the sense of red flags, is what is actually going on for me in that situation, rather than looking at red flags with them, looking at, oh, something isn't quite right inside of me, like something doesn't feel aligned here. So if you're walking on eggshells all the time around a certain person, and again, it can be a partner, it can be a boss, it can be a parent, a friend. If you have a feeling that you walk on eggshells all the time, that's a very high indication that you're dealing with a toxic person, because narcissists, they put the mask on and off at will. You never know who you're dealing with. And that's very destabilizing, because what happens is that you will start compromising yourself, your needs, your values, just to accommodate them, because the last thing you want is unleash the monster, right? So walking on eggshells. If you look in the mirror and you don't recognize the person looking back at you anymore, that's a high indication that very tactical identity erosion has happened. And that's actually how narcissistic abuse survivors turn into ghosts, because they lose everything they thought they were. And that's also where coaching then comes in so helpful, right? Because once we do our healing work, what it allows us to do is that we can rebuild, we can let go of everything that doesn't serve us anymore, but we can actually also hold on to all the good things that we really like about ourselves. And then through coaching, build this really authentic life, like I did as well. I couldn't have even imagined having a life that I have now. Feeling like an addict, when that's especially in the very beginning, when people don't understand yet what the situation is, and they don't have the language yet to explain what has happened to them. But it will be something along the lines of, I don't know what's wrong with me, I feel like an addict, or he or she is my heroin, he or she is my drug. And things like that are also important to know for professionals, right? Because those are actually things that the clients, the patients will say. Those are words they will use that then actually help us categorize what we are dealing with. And I already mentioned the trauma bond. You actually become addicted to love. And that's when you start feeling like an addict. And I remember I actually had like physical symptoms. I would be shaking like that, like physically shaking when he would leave. So it's really absolutely incredible what happens to the brain there. And those are all things that are happening for real. There is no excuse for it. How are you going to excuse that away? Because all of those things are happening inside of yourself. Or a very common one, I think I'm going crazy. And that's a very high indication of gaslighting, you know, where the reality gets distorted to such an extent where you are literally, you question everything, you're losing your mind. And of course, in the moment it happens, you have no reason to distrust that person. So you just believe them. You go like, I said that, I did that, doesn't even sound like me. But because you trust that person, you take it as the truth. And then all of a sudden, everything you remember doesn't seem to be true anymore. Incredibly powerful. And again, those are things that are happening for us when we are in that situation. And when we notice things like that, that's literally all we need to know. Because if we only focus on them, we will always find excuses just for those 5 minutes that they are then nice to us, you know.
It's incredible, isn't it? How, you know, our need to be accepted and loved means that we accept things about people that, you know, I guess in the cold, hard light of day, we think, well, I don't know how I ended up being in that situation.
And that's where the healing work comes in, right? Because that will then, and through coaching, you can already get quite far with that. The resolution needs deeper work, right? But, and it's not about blame either, but how did I actually get into this situation over and over and over again? Like the LA guy wasn't the first, he was just the worst. And what is it that makes me actually put up with being treated that way? And those things, they're actually on us, right? Because there are also people that will be treated that way and they go like, not with me, and they just walk away. It's easy. And that's where the actual healing work then takes place, because it all comes then down to developmental trauma. So it's not only just what has happened in the situation right now. So if you're a narcissistic abuse recovery coach, when they come to you, they're super activated because they had something really traumatic happen to them. So the first part is, okay, we need to stabilize the emotional well-being, you know, put their feet back on the ground, make them response able rather than just emotionally reactive. But then we need to dive deeper and actually explore, okay, so what is this actually about? Because that is the only way that we can ensure it won't happen again in the future. And again, that's why the multi-level training is important, because narcissistic abuse recovery is just so multi-leveled.
Yeah. What I'm quite interested to get your sort of perspective on is, what if we are in a relationship we can't walk away from? Well, it's more difficult to distance ourselves from, let's put it that way, because we always have a choice, right? Regardless of who it is in our lives, the choice isn't always easy. What if it's a member of our family? What then?
same rules apply. So the whole thing about blood being thicker than water is absolute nonsense, because it doesn't justify abusive behavior. And you're right, walking away from an abusive relationship is the hardest thing you will ever do in your life. And there are a lot of aspects to it. Of course, you know, it's important that you put safeguards in place and things like that. However, what's also important to understand is that it's part of the illusion that was created. It's part of the brainwash that we believe it's impossible to walk away because without them, we won't survive, which is actually a high indication for trauma bonding. If you know, somebody feels that way. And the only way to actually facilitate real narcissistic abuse recovery is when the person is no contact or extremely minimized contact, you know, when there are children involved and everything. And it doesn't matter whether that's a parent or a friend or a partner. It really doesn't matter. I had to go no contact with my best friend last year, which I never thought I would have to go through such a painful experience ever again in my life. And it almost felt worse than the relationship because, you know, he was a friend. But it's rule number one, and it's got to be done, because otherwise it doesn't really matter what modality you apply, it will always go in circles and will never actually get better.
It's so complex, which I guess is the reason why your work is now so widely recognized as one of the most effective, structured and masterful models when it comes to the recovery of complex trauma. And I know, as I said right up at the start, you know, your work has won multiple awards, which I think is incredible. So, you know, I just want to say congratulations again, Ronnie. I don't underestimate the hard work that you put into all of that. Could you maybe just share a little bit more about, you've spoken a lot about sort of values and, you know, the number one rule being sort of no contact. You know, can you talk maybe a little bit more about how you work as a narcissistic abuse recovery coach?
Me in particular or in general?
Well, I will leave that up to you.
Okay. So if someone, and it would be quite interesting actually, if you're interested in becoming a narcissistic abuse recovery coach, just put it in the comments, because way back when I was literally the only one. But now, obviously, how do we end up in a line of work like that? Because we want to help other people with what we have experienced, right? So would be quite interested to know who of you actually would like to work with narcissistic abuse, mental health, trauma, those kind of things. And when we actually make that decision to go into this kind of work, the most important thing is that we actually do our own deep healing work. And the key here is deep healing work with various different modalities, as I've already mentioned, because just having the theoretical knowledge will not be enough. If you don't do your own deep healing work, what will happen is you have a highly traumatized person sitting in front of you, and they're so going to push your buttons because you have so many emotional triggers yourself, which in turn means you won't be able to actually hold the space for the person, right? Because you get activated as well. So very important. And it's uncomfortable, it's scary, but it's necessary. If you want to work in this line of field, you got to put your oxygen mask on first, right? As they say on the plane. And you know, have your own coach. I'm still working with my coaching academy coach, Andrew. Do you know Andrew
Yes,
Jenkins?
I do. Yes, Andrew Jenkins.
So he's been my coach for 7 years. And we're still working together, you know, because life happens, and it's always good to have somebody in your corner, especially when you do work like that. So very important, really prioritize your well-being, your healing first, because then it will allow you to actually go into this space clean, you know, and hold the space for other people. Make sure you get a really in-depth understanding of what trauma actually is. So not just the personal experience, but what is it? Like, how does the brain actually work? What are different trauma responses? Because that's what you will experience in real life when somebody is sitting in front of you or in front of the camera. We are all different. We have different trauma responses. Does somebody go into a flight mode? Do they freeze? How do I even categorize what's happening to the person that's sitting in front of me? Because otherwise you don't know how to get them out of it, right? And as I said already earlier, the last thing you want is let somebody leave after the session and you're really like, you have this really uncomfortable feeling that's they might not be quite safe. Specialist training, we talked about that. Really build your toolbox. There is no one size fits all kind of solution. And the more tools you have at your disposal, the more you can share with others. And I'm a big fan of mixing and matching different things, trying out new things. And the best thing that all of us can do is stay curious, right? It's what makes life so exciting as well. So really look into the tools, try the tools yourself, and the ones that work, explore them, get trained, put them in your toolbox and share them with the world. And another thing that's super, super important for coaching in general, I think, because when we work with other people, when we want to help other people, is we need to be good in ourselves. If we don't feel well, and in trauma recovery, that's even more important. If you don't feel well, you won't be able to do your job. Simple as that. So it's very, very important to put a solid self-care routine in place for yourself. And whether you want to work with trauma or not, I can just highly recommend that you do that, because it will allow you to just be more resilient as well. And I'm not talking about the hair and the nails, right? We're coaches. We know we have tools that we can use in our daily self-care routine. So super, super important. And lastly, even more important, they were all important because I keep saying it's important, let go of your ego. And there are a lot of big egos in the coaching world, in the NLP world, hypnosis world, self-help world, all those gurus. If you genuinely want to help somebody, it's not about you, it's about the other person. And there is no room for ego in the trauma recovery work. There simply isn't. And it can be really tempting, right? You work with somebody and they have those incredible results and you're like, oh, I did that. No, you did not, actually. All you did was you offered support and guidance, as you should in a trauma-informed approach. You offered practical tools and they did what they needed to do, but they put the work in. It had nothing to do with you. And it can be tempting. And a lot of people, I see it every day, get carried away with it. But if you want to work in trauma recovery, narcissistic abuse or otherwise, there is no room for ego. If it's something you're struggling with, do some work on yourself to be able to let go of that. And that's actually where the magic happens, right? Because you are in this with them. It's not like, oh, you're not a service provider. It goes so much deeper than that, because it's a really energetic connection that you will share with your client.
100% in alignment with what you're saying there, and in particular this sort of the no room for the ego thing, and as you rightly said, there are a lot of big egos out there, not just in the trauma world, but you sort of in the world generally, and we see it a lot out there.
Narcissists.
One of my big hobby horses, that one. Ronnie, I can't believe where the time gone. We're right up on the hour. I know there's been some questions coming in on the chat, which we now haven't got time to address. But where can people find you, maybe to get some additional questions answered if people have some additional ones, or just to follow you to see the incredible work that you do?
You can find me on social media, obviously, Facebook, Instagram, Rock and Roll Coach Ronnie, and I'm not on TikTok.
Neither am I.
My website is roniafraser.com, so you can have a little look around there as well. And if you have any questions, please just shoot me a message, because I actually love answering questions, because it's so important to have a conversation around it. And there's a lot of information overwhelm online. So whether you have questions about going into that direction professionally, or you have questions about a certain situation that you have, I can have a read through the questions as well afterwards. I'm very happy to answer the questions, because I think it's very important.
Lovely. Thank you, Ronia. I hope you have more time. Will you come back and speak to us again soon, perhaps next year? That would be amazing.
Absolutely.
Maybe we can dive into another area.
Yeah.
It has been incredible. Thank you, those of you who have hung on to the last minute. I'm sure you found it worthwhile. Thank you so much. I found it incredibly inspirational, as I knew I would and always do when I speak to you. But from Ronia and from myself and Catherine, from the whole team here at the Coaching Academy, have a wonderful time.